everybody. Welcome to the world's greatest Bronze Age Spider-Man podcast. Here comes the Spider-Cast. I'm your co-host, Mike Allen. As always, I'm joined by...
Joshua Mervell, and today we're going to be taking a look at December of 1988 with all the Spidey comics that came out that month.
Yes, that's right. And we've got G.I. Jolie with us.
Hi! My eyes always go wide as if this is a video podcast. I have to keep remembering it's audio only.
Well, you know, we'll have the audience know we are recording video. We just don't ever release it. So you'll have to wait for the special DVD release of this show, right? One day? Mm-hmm. When DVDs no longer exist.
We'll do like a viral marketing idea with like release the syndicate cut.
There you go. Yep.
That sounds gross.
Yeah.
Okay, we've also got Bex Luthor with us. Thanks for joining us, Bex.
I am also here. Sorry I missed last week, but I was tired.
I'm always tired, but in any case.
I was not available.
Okay, no excuse. It's okay. You don't have to explain yourself. But anyway, we've also got a very special guest here. I'm super pumped. We've got a documentary filmmaker with us, Brad Fay. Thank you for joining us, Brad.
No problem. Hi, guys. Yes. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for absolutely. Coming on. And we met through, well, we haven't met yet, but we've communicated through email. Now, just refresh my memory. How did you ever, like, you saw the Comic Book Syndicate, or you heard the Spider-Cast, or how did that work?
Comic Book Syndicate first. And then that led me to Here Comes the Spider-Cast after that. So it was initially through Comic Book Syndicate that I started watching the videos and seeing some of your interviews and being like, this is good research.
Thank you. Because I'll have you know, we don't do any research. No, just kidding. We do a little bit. But it's mostly from memory. I mean, unfortunately, I've read way too many comics. I mean, if you know those memes where you see like the guy cornering the girl at like the bar, and like she's rolling her eyes, that's me, but it's also all of us. So it's not just the guys.
That's how Mike and I met.
Yeah, exactly. But we were doing it to each other, you know? Like,
yeah, we were just trying to out-nerd each other, and we were like, God, this person's insufferable. And then...
So, Brad, why don't you tell us, you've actually done a few documentaries, right?
Well, we completed our first documentary in 2019, Geek and You Shall Find, which is, for anyone listening, it's available on Amazon Prime. I always get yelled at by the rest of the production team when I don't give the full rundown, but that's what Google's for. But to my latest update, it's Amazon Prime, iTunes, Roku. I just did a Google search and saw Roku, which I don't believe I have. I've heard Crackle from people before. So a few different streaming services, but once you know it's called Geek and You Shall Find, you can pretty much find it some way, somehow.
And tell us what it's about exactly.
Yeah, so back in like 2015, 2016, we had the idea of kind of interviewing cosplayers, asking them what their motivations were for cosplaying, why this character. Not really expecting to get any like deeper level stuff, just kind of, you know, I've been big into people's connections with superheroes, what it is that resonates about superheroes with people. So I thought I'd be like smart and be putting people onto this and being like, did you realize that like psychologically you're pre-wired to like superheroes and all this stuff? But we ended up, honestly, like as cliche as it sounds, learning a lot more from the cosplayers than we knew, and them telling us kind of the personal reasons they dress up as these characters. And we found we had a lot more research to do on our end, and that's what led us basically to do this film. So we interviewed people dressed up as Anakin Skywalker, let's say, who would tell us, you know, it was really crazy the way people would just open up, like, felt really comfortable around this right away, which really helps a ton. But someone dressed up as Anakin Skywalker saying they had lost their father at a young age and kind of knew they were felt with a choice of allowing their anger to consume them and just becoming a bitter, angry person, or trying to do something better in the world. And now that specific person goes to hospitals dressed up as Anakin Skywalker and brightens the day of kids in hospitals. So, you know, it just shows like people kind of recognize like there's a reason they like these superheroes or villains in some cases.
Very interesting.
That's amazing.
You know, I mean, you know, superheroes and comics and sci-fi is part of mainstream culture now, but I think there's still a little bit of misunderstanding where I don't think people, the mainstream, I don't think they really appreciate that there is an extra level to it, right? There's like a mythological level to it. And for us to read Spider-Man comics or watch Star Wars, it's not just because we're attached to stuff we liked as a kid. I think there's an extra level to it that a lot of people are missing. You know, there's a psychological level to it. And I think that, you know, George Lucas was with Star Wars, he was tapping into that, right? With patterning the movies after mythology. So I definitely think that's there. So I'm sure you came across that, right?
A lot of that. Obviously, I'm a big like Joseph Campbell fan. Like probably even before I knew like Lucas, like what, you know, an impact he had on Lucas. I was reading everything. We've interviewed like the president of the Joseph Campbell Foundation, who was great. Wow. Bob Walter. That was one of my all-time favorite interviews. So it's usually one of our producers, Kelsey Dickerson, who does the interview and I film. And that was definitely one of those interviews where I was just like not even paying attention. I was just like so into it. And he's done stuff with like William Shatner. He did a documentary with William Shatner, kind of unpacking Star Trek fandom. So he's very much aware of kind of the why we gravitate towards these mythologies and kind of understanding and appreciating that, you know, these are just our modern mythologies now.
Excellent. Wow, I totally agree with that. Interesting. We'll have to talk more about that later for sure. But today, I wish these were as good as mythology, but some of these Spidey comics are not quite as up to the level of a Greek myth. Before we jump into these reviews, how familiar are you with 80s Spidey?
Me? Pretty. I always kind of get lost between, okay, when did the 90s begin? Definitely big, like, intro of Venom, Maximum Carnage. So sometimes that spills over to, like, one of these issues I know we'll be talking about today is, like, a Todd Mcfarlane one. So I'm like, okay, maybe it was a little bit earlier. I mean, I was born in 80, so...
Gotcha.
I kind of grew up, like, in both, but because I grew up with both, it's, like, kind of a hodgepodge of, like, okay, when did technically 90s start? So definitely familiar with that era. Not these specifically. I semi-remembered some of the storylines, but not the issues I know we'll be talking about today.
Well, one good way to remember is Todd McFarlane's last issue of Amazing Spider-Man was January 90, but then he started on his own Spider-Man book about a year later, and the same month that he left Amazing Spider-Man, Rob Liefeld started on New Mutants. So you can see, right, that whole... everything was changing right at the same time, right? Like the image artists were all becoming really popular right around the same time.
And that's when they relaunched like X-Men #1 with Jim Lee.
Right.
And then all of those, I'm always like, did the Spider-Man lead to X-Men becoming X-Men #1, or was it X-Men #1? I remember the Spider-Man being like the best-selling, and I remember like being into comics at that time. So that was probably right when I like broke in. Was right around the time a lot of people considered all going to crap and multiple covers and all that stuff. But that was like the kind of stuff that introduced me to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, even like I started around 86 and I'm part of all these Facebook groups that are always crapping on anything after 1986 is crap. And I'm like, well, I started in 86 and I thought it was fine. So, right? So yeah, again, we apologize for the quality of some of these comics, but we're going to start off today with Web of Spider-Man number 45, and I will point out, before we even get into this, this is a fill-in. It is by the regular artist, Alex Saviuk, but the script is by Adam Blaustein, who I've never heard of in my life. So
probably
this is
for a reason.
Yeah, probably for a reason, so this is not a regular writer. But I believe, Josh, you're going to tell us what this one's about, right? And then we're going to dive into the review.
Yeah, so surprisingly, even though it's a fill-in, it still, like... works with the continuity of everything that's going on right now. So currently in the comics, Spidey / Peter Parker are kind of like going on a tour around the US promoting this book that was that's being published by the Daily Bugle, and the author is Peter Parker, and it's all of his photographs that he's taken of Spider-Man for the Daily Bugle. So both Peter and kind of Spider-Man are going on this tour to promote this book release, and they're kind of like going to different like news stations and tonight shows and like late night shows and things like that. So we pick up with Peter in Las Vegas, and he's like done everything he has to do here, and he's about to fly home to New York City. We see him like swinging through Vegas on his way to the airport. He kind of like offhand mentions how in the last battle in Las Vegas from last issue, his web shooters were broken by the Hulk. Or sorry, they weren't broken. He almost used all of his web fluid, and he doesn't have any more. It's all back in New York. He gets to the airport. Peter kind of realizes that he's like on this weird airline called the Rattlesnake, and it's these rich billionaires, and it's just these rich billionaires and Peter for some reason. I don't know. I don't know. We catch up with the Vulture. He is like flying to his secret cave in the middle of the desert. He's talking to all of these like animals, and he's like monologuing to them. And he's kind of like giving us a recap of what's happened to him lately. And he talks about how before he kind of like quit being the Vulture, and he found himself a job, and he became an inventor, and he like invented this like type of plastic that you can control with your mind or something like that, so you can rig game tables at casinos. And he actually pitched it to this bigwig that is running the private plane that Peter is on. His name is probably Rattlesnake or something. I can't remember. Morris the Snake Diamond. Sorry.
Great.
So, and then it's kind of revealed that all of these creatures that he's been talking to are also like made of this like weird plastic, and he smashes it. Anyways, he's out for revenge for these guys. We cut over to Peter. He's on the plane. These guys are like smoking cigars and harassing the stewardess that's working there. And then Peter's spidey senses go off, and we actually see that Vulture comes and like throws a stick of dynamite at the plane, and it explodes. So Peter has to like quickly help everybody get on parachutes. We have this like really cinematic scene where everybody is like parachuting down from the crashing plane. The Vulture's flying in between them, trying to find Rattlesnake, and he grabs him and he flies off. So everybody else is kind of like left here in the middle of the desert, and there's like an altercation where the stewardess says we should go to the plane because it's smoking. It'll be easier for people to find us since we're in the middle of a desert. And then like one of the goons like hits her with the butt of his gun and knocks her out. And so she's out cold. Peter's kind of there like taking care of her. And after like the Vulture altercation happens, everybody kind of spreads out, and Peter's left there with the unconscious girl. So he switches into his Spidey costume, picks her up, and starts walking over to Vulture's cave. We see that he's interrogating this guy, and that he's not really taking Vulture seriously, and he's about to inject him with this serum that's gonna like turn him into like this hard plastic and essentially make him like a statue. That's when Peter shows up, and him and Vulture start fighting, and then they end up outside of the cave, and there just so happens to be a mountain lion that's going to go eat the unconscious woman. So Peter has to use the last of his web fluid to web up this giant cat. So he has to fight Vulture with just his like spidey senses and his fist, essentially. So he ends up getting the best of Vulture, but only right after he gets injected in his arm. So he kind of like falls to the ground, and his arm starts going stiff, and he uses that to actually knock Vulture out. But shortly after, he actually goes unconscious, and when he wakes up, the stewardess is actually like above him. She interrogated the Vulture until he like fessed up what the antidote was, and I guess used it on Spider-Man. And it turns out that this woman is like a CIA agent, and she was there to bust the like these big wigs and to bring them in. And it just so happens that the Vulture was there, and they were able to bring him in too. And we kind of leave while we leave things off as they're like walking to the sunset, and Spidey asks for a ride back to New York. So it's an interesting issue. I think it's kind of fun for a fill-in, and it's interesting that it like connects nicely in with the story that's going on. It's very like corny in that like comic book way.
Right.
The supervillain like plan is so ridiculous, but it kind of like works. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those like corny things. I surprisingly had fun reading this one. It's not a great issue, but I had fun with it. You
know, this is one of those ones where I had every issue of Web of Spider-Man, you know, in this era. For years, though, I couldn't find this one. And then when I finally read it, I didn't enjoy it. But rereading it, I like it a little bit more. And there's a couple things I noticed that stood out. Again, like we said, this is sort of a fill-in, but this one character, this like he looks like sort of like a cliche of like a Texan oil mogul, but he keeps speaking in Yiddish slang, right? And I thought that's kind of unusual. And then now the fact that the writer's last name is
Blaustein.
Assuming they're Jewish. And then also the stewardess is a black woman who ends up being kind of the hero of the story. So I thought that was interesting. Then I read up that the writer of this book is actually not Adam Blaustein. It's Maddie Blaustein writing under a pseudonym. So
No. Adam is their dead name. They are Maddie Blaustein.
Oh, what did
They
you find
were,
that?
I should say, R.I.P. 2008.
Yeah, I was gonna say, excuse me, Maddie Blaustein voices Meowth in Pokemon.
I wanted to also mention, they're a voice actor. They were a voice
Oh,
actor.
see, I
Really?
didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, like,
I changed my
as
mind.
a
This issue's
writer-
great.
Yeah, that's my favorite. It's just Spider-Man.
didn't take much. No,
Yeah, happy Pride.
yeah, I couldn't believe what I was reading. This person had such a wild life, and it only also just included a couple of Marvel comic books, and also a Conan. But like, they wrote for DC, for Marvel, just here and there, as like probably just like fill-ins or whatever. But like you were saying before, it fits in. I can't remember if was it Josh that said it. All of these fill-ins that we've been reading, they don't. They are clearly fill-ins, and it's like they don't care what's happening in the story, or it takes place as part of a story that was happening like 4 issues ago. This one slots in really nicely. He still like talks about his book tour, which we are very aware he's on, and it's just kind of like, it's super one and done. It's almost like the writer read the comics and then was like, okay, so they need to fill in. What is a logical fill in? Oh, I know. Peter has to travel for this book tour. Why don't we just do like a little caper where he's on an airplane? And then and everything sort of works.
Right.
Yeah, it's really refreshing because it really feels like most of the time the different people in charge of the books don't communicate with each other whatsoever. And nothing really kind of aligns. Like, even characters feel different in the same month between books. Like, there's just no consistency. So to see that, and then like something that actually happened in the last issue directly affecting this one, like him using so much web fluid to fight the Hulk that he's run out in this issue. It's like, it's really great that they were able to continue that.
That's the way you do continuity. I like that. But Brad, we want to hear from you though. What was your take on this issue?
Yeah, so it definitely required some suspended belief in the early going. I'm like, all right, so he happens to be on this like weird airline. He happens to be with all these criminals. One of them happens to have a prior like beef with the Vulture, who's this long time. There was definitely like a lot of like stuff in the beginning that was kind of rough, but one of the positives I really took out of this issue is I like the idea that they put Spider-Man like in a it shows you how much Spider-Man has to rely on like his environment. And when you drop him off in the middle of a desert or on a boat in the middle of the ocean, like all of a sudden how much that kind of changes his power set. And like, you know, it shows how much you rely, especially in movies too. You kind of need this character to look cool and kind of do his thing. You need him like bouncing off walls and flipping around. And, you know, he's kind of now just an awkward dude in the desert relying on his like fists. And all of a sudden, like, he's just like any other guy who's like a well-trained fighter. So I thought that was pretty cool to have to see him like use other abilities.
Right, and total fish out of water, right? It was great.
And then on top of that, teaming him up with a villain that flies in the same issue that he loses his web fluid is so great. I can't remember who it was, but I was watching this like interview with somebody that was like a writer, and they said it's okay to put somebody in a situation through coincidence, but you should never write them out of a situation through a coincidence.
Right.
So at the beginning, I also thought it was really messy how he was just the only passenger on this jet. I'm like, okay, sure. But then I don't know, by the end, they kind of pulled it all together for me, and like everything kind of fell into place.
Right. Bex Luthor, what did you think? the story.
I always just shout this up to the Parker bad luck. And you could say that that's just a writing device, but bad luck literally is a thing in Marvel Comics. Like, his ex-girlfriend's superpower is bad luck. So, like, I think Peter Parker just has this aura of bad luck. I mean, later in the comics, he's always dealing with Mephisto. Like, he's just has a rough go of it. So, of course, he'd end up on the plane with a bunch of illegal cowboys. Like, why not? And I feel like we've gotten this far in Spider-Man with these kind of things. I'm like, now he's in the desert with Vulture, and these guys owe Vulture money. Like, let's go. It doesn't bug me as much. What does bother me is that this woman definitely knows that he's Spider-Man. Like,
yeah.
Right?
absolutely. Like he was Peter Parker on the plane, and she recognized him.
Yep.
And then Peter Parker's nowhere to be seen by the end of it, but Spider-Man's here in the middle of the desert. So,
Right.
Shout out to just giving your identity away to a government agent. But other than that, and I'm sure she never comes up again, and we'll never hear from any of these characters again besides the Vulture. No, it was fun. It was fine. It was, it's no, like, masterpiece, but also, like, as far as fill-ins go, it's probably done a lot better than a lot of the fill-ins we've read, which are, some of them haven't been good.
Right.
There's no high evolutionary, and I'm happy for that.
Okay. So, Brad, we talk about Alex Saviuk every week, but have you ever come across this artist before, Alex Saviuk?
The name sounds really familiar.
I mean, he did Web of Spider-Man for like 8 years, then he did Spider-Man Adventures, then he did the Daily Strip, so he's been drawing Spider-Man for like decades, yeah. But usually his art's pretty good. I think this issue actually stands out. Like, I think Keith Williams is doing a better job inking this issue. It seems more detailed and more like there's more shading and stuff. So I don't know. Were you a fan of the art?
Yeah, I was, and the coloring too. Like, especially I'm in Arizona, so
Right.
It's not a coincidence. Like, everything we have is purple, orange, yellow. For that, all our sports teams, like, the Diamondbacks are kind of like red because the Sunsets, and the Cardinals and the Phoenix Suns, and all our team colors are kind of. So I thought that jumped out at me too, of like kind of the coloring in this issue being a lot of orange and yellow because he's in a totally different environment than I'm sure the artists are used to having to kind of depict him in.
Interesting. I wouldn't have noticed that. Also, I got to point out the coloring is done by none other than Janet Jackson taking a break from her 1814 tour, slumming it at Marvel, doing colors. But yeah, it's a good job here.
We love Janet here. She is a queen of coloring.
So yeah, I gotta admit, it's almost like I did enjoy it more than I thought, and the more we talk about it, the more I enjoy it. It's not a masterpiece, but definitely a fun fill-in. So I'm gonna recommend it. Josh, what about you?
Yeah, it has that like retro comic feel, and it's super fun. The story really goes with the art I find in this issue, so it's gonna be a recommend for me.
G.I. Jolie?
Yes. Read this one.
Okay.
It's super fun.
Brad, what about you? Do you recommend this issue?
I would recommend tough it out for the first 4 or 5 pages. Once you're in the situation and if you've accepted that you're here now, I think you're good to go after that.
Awesome. Bex Luthor?
If I recommend it for anything but that panel where he talking to all the animal statues, because it's a little...
It's bizarre.
What's going on? What animal is that one? Where you got a couple armadillos, a snake, and some mammals.
Yeah.
Nondescript.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. There's
What
a
the
bat
hell?
in there too.
Have you ever gone on the internet? No, that's a bad sentence to start. Never. And you've seen those bad taxidermy?
Sure.
That's what this is.
Yeah.
It's just
I
bad
concur.
taxidermy.
Yeah.
There you go. So Web of Spider-Man 45. Check it out for sure. Now we're going to jump to Amazing Spider-Man number 309. The first appearance of Styx and Stone. And Bex Luthor, I believe you're going to summarize this one, right?
You don't know Styx and Stone?
Come on. Everyone knows Styx and Stone.
Their first appearance was in Amazing Spider-Man, whatever number this is, 309. Yeah, so I want to preface this by saying I'm looking at the recoloring, because that's how we normally read these, but I read it as just a digital scan.
Sure.
I got some things to say about our boy Todd and how time has done him wonders. This looks so much better.
Really?
Anyway,
The recoloring does?
The recoloring never looks better, but Todd McFarlane's recolors look better. But anyway, so we start off, and I believe last time we left, Peter was fighting this massive dude to try to get information because his wife has been kidnapped.
Right.
But we know that Mary Jane's been kidnapped by literally their next door neighbor, and he's literally one floor below Peter and Mary Jane's apartment. So he's like running all over town trying to figure out who found out Spider-Man's identity and then kidnapped his wife. So he's just trying to get information out of all of these goons, and it doesn't work out. They don't know anything, so he goes and sulks on top of a building, breaks a gargoyle, you know, all that jazz. And then he goes home to sulk some more. Meanwhile, one floor beneath him, Mary Jane is in the apartment of... Man, I cannot remember this man's name.
Caesar?
Jonathan Caesar.
Jonathan Caesar, right. Very important character. Who has kidnapped her and has been in love with her for years. And has locked her away behind this safe door special room that he made in his apartment just for her. She clearly is not cool with any of this happening, and she tries to escape again, but his massive brick wall goons stop her, and he threatens her once more. He's like, I don't want to have to hurt you, but I will. Great guy, you know? So Peter goes back to work the next day, and you get a cute little scene where J. Jonah tells him to get off his ass and go find some work, and then as soon as he's leaving, he's like, I want every reporter on Mary Jane's kidnapping. So it's like, I like those little tidbits of J. Jonah just being a human being and actually giving a shit about his employees. That's nice. We get Peter visiting Robbie, who has previously had his back broken by Tombstone and is recovering. He's also being charged with accessory to murder because he admitted that he knew that Tombstone murdered all the people and didn't say anything about it.
Right.
And then did say something about it later. So they have like a little powwow. I thought he was totally over it, but I guess he's still sad about it, so good for him. Back at Caesar's apartment, we are introduced to Styx and Stone, who Jonathan Caesar has hired because he hears that Spider-Man is looking for Mary Jane. And in his incredible intelligence and wisdom, assumes that Peter has asked Spider-Man to find Mary Jane instead of Peter is Spider-Man. So, Styx and Stone, for people who don't know, which I don't know which one's which, not important. One of them can disintegrate organic matter through touch, and the other one is a big, strong guy, right? That's the powers set?
Yes.
Yeah,
Styx is the skinny guy, and Stone is the big guy.
Yeah.
That does make sense, but I thought maybe they'd do a funny reverse, because...
Like calling the biggest guy in jail tiny, right?
Yes. But no, we're just straightforward at this point, so that's fine. So he hires them, and they're gonna kill Spider-Man so that he can't find Mary Jane. Peter's swinging back home, no luck finding Mary Jane that day, and Jonathan Caesar sees him out the window and assumes he's coming to get him, because why else would Spider-Man be coming to this apartment building? He literally lives the floor above. I don't know how this is ever a secret anymore, but it still is. So he goes, Sticks and Stones, go get him. Spider-Man Spider Sense goes off. Stone just has an entire tank on his back. And so they're I don't know why they both need to be there, but they're both there. A little fight in the park ensues. Stone blasts him with, like, crazy amounts of whatever, and he loses part of his vision. Meanwhile, in the apartment, a bunch of water was spilled when Mary Jane threw ice at Jonathan Caesar's face earlier, and she uses this to grab what looks like some sort of lamp and breaks the lamp, but tries to electrify Jonathan Caesar through the water on the floor, but he's like, haha, my shoes, they're rubber. And she's like, well, your face isn't rubber, and smashes the vase over his face and cuts him. And then his security comes in, and she's like, their shoes aren't rubber, and she electrocutes them and steals their gun and runs off. So back in the park, Peter's still fighting Sticks and Stone, and then he's not doing too hot because he can't really see, and Stone goes to touch his face, or Sticks goes to touch his face, which I know doesn't work, because he could only... They've already stated this back before, where Styx can only disintegrate organic matter. And Peter's suit is inorganic matter, and they literally use that as an excuse all the time. So I was like, okay, cool, nothing happens. But what actually is cool is freaking Mary Jane shows up with a gun and starts shooting people to save her man. Which might be my favorite thing Todd McFarlane's ever drawn in his entire career, is this panel of Mary Jane with a gun. So she clearly doesn't have a lot of experience with a gun, but that doesn't stop her from just firing wildly at these people. And they run off, and Peter's like, oh my god, you saved me. And she's like, oh my god, I saved you. And he's like a little upset that he didn't save her. But it's beautiful and romantic and wonderful. So Peter goes back home, Mary Jane goes to the police, and they say that they'll get her statement later, and they just go back into their apartment. And that's the end of this episode.
The end. I thought it was a pretty good issue. I actually liked the way the kidnapping subplot was resolved, you know?
Thank God.
Surprisingly, yeah.
I thought it was going to drag out a lot longer, so yeah, I did enjoy this issue. But let's jump right to Brad. Brad, it's you. What did you think of this issue? Have you read any Todd McFarlane Spideys before?
Read a ton of Todd McFarlane Spidey. I really like, and I'm glad like Bex pointed this like particular moment out. I don't know if it says something about my character. I always like the jerk who has a moment of being a heart, you know, having a heart, and you're kind of reminded like they're decent underneath all that. So even though it was such a small moment when J. Jonah is like, you know, like I want everybody on this kind of thing, you're like, yeah, I knew I didn't hate that guy for like a good reason. Almost like makes you feel justified as like being a good judge of character. Sure. And you're like, I knew I shouldn't have hated. So I thought that like moment really like stood out. And of course like Mary Jane getting to be a badass and kind of saving the day is a cool, you know, it was very much appreciated too. Kind of her like, I don't need him to save me. I got his back this time.
Nice.
G.I. Jolie.
Oh my god, this is so good.
Yeah, it was good, eh?
It made me think, boy, they were making comic book movies at the time that this was released, like the way that they are now. All I could think is, you know who would play Mary Jane in that panel? Is Pamela Anderson a red wig in a red wig. That's all I could see, because like honestly, that's exactly what Mary Jane looks like. Like Todd McFarlane's Mary Jane is Pamela Anderson's body.
Yeah, for good or ill, right?
Pardon?
For good or ill.
Yeah, always for good. CJ's the best.
It's that Canadian influence. It's got to be the Canadian connection between Pamela Anderson and Todd McFarlane.
That's obviously it,
absolutely. And like, I will say, I think I read the same scans, the recolored scans as Bex, but like, I hated the recolor. I think that's the only thing that was terrible about this issue. It was so distracting and god awful.
Oh, interesting. Becca, didn't you have the opposite opinion?
Oh.
Yes, because I read just a scan of it and not the recolor originally, and the scan, Todd McFarlane's art has not aged well on its actual paper. I'm sure it was better when it was originally printed, but anything that's like a little bit older, the amount of lines that this man does, they bleed in as they age, and it just it looks worse for it. And I think if like it had stronger inking, it would maintain it better, but because he does so much of this little thin, a lot of the little thins, it just is like a bad tattoo. It just becomes kind of mush as it ages, which is not anything against him. I mean, you don't really draw comic books so that they age on paper. It's like you're just drawing them, right? Like, and I think we talked about Marvel's comic book inking at the time for a lot, and how just they were just doing whatever they could figure out. But yeah, it's a lot easier to read the digitally enhanced ones than it would be to read like a real issue, I think. Unless you're reading like a pristine 9.8, which don't. Right.
The thing is, I think the art in this issue is actually slightly below average for McFarlane.
Yeah,
like
that's
it's
what I was gonna
sloppier and yeah, but the other thing too is when they recolor, it's not as simple as just recoloring, because they have to augment the original ink somehow, and in this issue it just doesn't work. Something's not right.
It's the inking that's really off, I find, in this issue. I agree with Jolie and Mike. Like, something is off, and I can only imagine how like much worse Becca's issue, like actual issue, would have been, because Yeah, and I love Todd McFarlane. I always talk about, like, every episode I'm like in support, but for some reason, I don't know, the inking is just not doing it for me. Yeah, it's really weird. There's you're right. There's moments where it's like I can barely look at some of the panels, and then there's others where it's just so well done. Like the scene of Peter in costume sulking on the rooftop next to the gargoyles is so well done. The art, the inking, it's like perfect. I absolutely love it. I also love just like the beginning in that scene, like having Peter kind of like be a little bit more dark, like he's getting desperate at this point. The woman that he loves, like his wife, is missing. He has no idea, so he's kind of like at wit's end, and like kind of like pushes himself and his boundaries as far as they will go when he's interrogating that guy. And then he has like this moment of clarity on the building and kind of like refocuses, like, okay, listen, I need to calm down. Like, I can't let my anger and fear get the better of me. Like, my anger breaking this gargoyle almost could have cost somebody their lives. I need to just slow down and figure out what the hell is going on here. So, like, I don't know. There's just moments like that where it feels like he totally understands this character, and like this type of scene is like what I think about is Peter Parker. Right. I just loved it. Yeah.
Well, since we're talking about McFarlane, Brad, what did you think about... Are you a fan of Todd McFarlane, first of all?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's an Arizona guy, too. I've gotten to actually interview him a few times.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, I will never say anything bad about it. He's the nicest Canadian guy in the world. So, I would never say anything bad about it. Anything he does to me. And that's a big reason why I got into comic books to begin with. So, like, I'm always... Whether it be that nostalgia that you maybe put someone on a pedestal higher than you should kind of thing, like, I would definitely be guilty of that with him.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, I grew up on him, and like I always say, like I used to draw as a kid, and one of the weirdest things is that not only did I start to draw more like McFarlane, but I was so obsessed with Todd McFarlane that I would take old drawings and I would re-ink them with more lines to look more like his art, you know? Because like me and my friends were just obsessed with him. He was like a genuine superstar, you know, at the time.
Yeah,
for sure. So
kind of like 3D before there was 3D. You
right.
know, like a lot of his stuff, just the way it like popped off the page. And it's funny, like you remember things sometimes not entirely like accurate. Like I always think like, oh, older comics, everything's within the panel and blah, blah, blah. But sometimes I'll go back and I'll look at old stuff and I'm like, oh, they were starting to break through the panels and do that stuff a lot longer ago than I remember it. But Todd McFarlane stuff is just whether because of the webbing coming at you, there were just certain things that made that character just leap off the, like literally seem like he was leaping off the page.
He also, and that's the thing is, I thought that he invented all the techniques. He might not have invented them, but I think he was the first guy to combine them. Like a little bit of Frank Miller, a little bit of Art Adams, a little bit of Michael Golden, right? And he put it all into one style.
Yeah, he did it's called the noodling. Like he was the first one to make the webs look like noodles because like
spaghetti
and
webbing,
before him, it had been more flat. So McFarlane was the one that was like, okay, if you loop it around, and I don't know how he had the patience. I mean, anyone who draws Spider-Man has the most amount of patience of anybody. Like that has to be the most difficult character to draw panel after panel after panel. But yeah, McFarlane did kind of the webbing coming at you, and I think he called it noodling.
No, it was spaghetti webbing, but I have to point out it was actually invented by Michael Golden.
Oh, so that was right before.
Yeah.
So that would have been 80s also, but just right before.
Early 80s. Yeah, he did it. He drew him a couple times, and McFarlane scooped it from him. But McFarlane gets the credit. But yeah, it was Michael Golden that did it first. But
funny
anyway.
how it works that way at Marvel a lot of times, right? You're
Of course.
You're the one side of the story of, oh, he's the guy that did this. Huh?
Yep. Happens everywhere, right?
Yeah, true.
So, okay, so I'm actually trying to keep track here. I'm trying to stay organized, guys. But Josh, have you talked about the story yet?
Not really the story. The story is pretty good. I love that MJ is like an actual character in this and not just like the love interest damsel in distress. Her taking charge and like escaping herself and then saving Peter is like so much fun. I absolutely love that. Yeah, these two characters are like fine. I know this is like 89-ish, so it's like right at the end of the 80s. But these two characters feel like the 90s came to life. Like
Yeah.
it's like the 90s personified. They're so ridiculous. Like
I'm gonna guess McFarlane had a hand in creating them. You know?
Oh, for sure. I don't
'Cause-
think they're new to this, right? So like,
Yeah,
this is their
yeah.
first issue. So yeah, it had to for sure.
But like these are definitely the types of characters the Image guys would create. Like so literal. Like I remember the worst one I ever saw was Art T. Bear had a duo called Black and White, and it was a guy dressed in black and the girl was dressed in white, and that was it. Like there's not even a metaphor like cloak and dagger or hawk and dove. You know?
They feel like the Ninja Turtles villains. Like when the cartoon was coming out, they were making the toys faster than they can make the show. So they were just like making weird mutant villains, and they had to incorporate them. They just have that vibe. Like Stone is just like this big like Chad that's just got like these huge like rockets strapped to his shoulders, and like it's just so ridiculous and fun. It's a pretty goofy issue, but I'm enjoying it. There's like also like I have to point out all the time these like great moments that Todd McFarlane includes in his like panels and his work. I don't have the page number, but it's when Stone throws like the flashbang at Spidey and he goes blind, and there's like that the middle of the page, there's no panel lines, and it's like pure white, and Spidey's like silhouette is all in yellow, and he's in this like super dramatic pose. It's so great and so ridiculous and like so pushed. And then the next panel we see like it's still super bright and like just pure yellow, and there's like flashes all around his face. Then the last panel is just one panel of pure blackness as he goes blind. Like it's just I don't know, you don't have to have any words on this page and you understand what happened. You see the other two coil and like cover their eyes before the flash happens, and then we see this huge like white empty space, and then we see that Peter's like got these like things around his face that he's losing his vision, and then black panel. It's so well done, and the directing of the panels and everything, it's just like it's perfect storytelling.
I gotta say,
the art.
The Styx and Stone looking away is the best part of this page. It's so smart. No one else would think to do that. It's just awesome. I love it. There's a lot of great moments in this one like that. Like even the whole sequence, the art in this issue is a little bit rough, but the whole sequence of Mary Jane fighting back against Jonathan Caesar is really well done. Smashing him over the head with the lamp, and then the next page electrocuting those guys, and then running, and then 2 pages later with the gun. That's a classic sequence. I think it's really well done.
Yeah, it's all of this stuff is very cinematic. Like I can see this translating over to like a film exactly. You know what I mean? Like exactly how it plays out here, I can see it playing out in real life. It's it's really well done.
Does anyone else have any more comments about Amazing Spider-Man 309, the first appearance of Styx and Stone?
Great. I'm glad you pointed out the gargoyle moment too, Josh. That was also like, as much as it's just like a small little moment, like the J. Jonah, where it's like it's just another good reminder of like what makes Spider-Man work, is those little subtle reminders of like with great power comes great responsibility, even if it's not the focus of a whole issue.
Yeah.
Right. Characterization, right?
Without having to show Uncle Ben die again.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. It's like, it's great that he didn't have to mention Uncle Ben to get that moment too.
Or Gwen, he didn't have to be like, oh, I've lost so many people. Like, we get it.
Yeah,
And
no
then they
over
all
the
show up in
shoulder
the
shot.
clouds.
Yeah.
Oh, just
No,
so
you can just be sad.
Just so you guys know, Styx and Stone do come back.
Oh, cool.
Why?
Yeah.
What?
7 more times, okay?
All right.
Wow.
Let's
They're
go.
like modern comics, right?
They do appear
Because they get cool new looks.
Deadman Logan
they
and
get
Spider-Man
rebooted?
Deadpool. I think that's about it.
Maybe
for-
that's where I know it from, Spider-Man Deadpool.
Yeah.
Because, like, the Styx and Stone that I know is, I think, from Spider-Man Deadpool, and Styx is like a creepy skeleton man, and Stone is a
Ooh.
big boulder man.
Oh, that sounds
pretty
better than
cool.
these designs.
Yeah, they're not just two dudes, they're like weird.
Cool.
creepy
Looking forward
things.
to it.
I don't remember that issue being good, but I remember that.
Whoa,
Didn't say
yeah,
they were
they're
good.
really cool in the reboot.
Yeah.
Like their new looks are awesome.
So
Because it's like a fun, but yeah, it's like a fun like concept.
Yeah.
definitely. I think the problem is like I like Styx kind of like what kind of suit is that? It's almost like
It's like a magician suit almost, like
well,
without the
yeah.
top hat.
It's almost like 18th century, right, or something.
Yeah.
19th century. But then Stone is just in this stupid superhero costume, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't match at all. The style doesn't match. So
They have
maybe,
like a double-sized like goblin glider, so they can both fit on it.
Well, do they? I
That's
didn't
pretty
notice
cute.
that.
Yeah, they've got
do.
like a big glider that they kind of like huddle on to fly around.
I didn't even notice
Together.
that.
Yeah.
Because they're a duo. They're a team.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I see that now. That's
And
definitely a
they're in love.
McFarlane invention. Yeah.
What, that they were in love?
It's
no, I
canon.
just invented that. It's canon.
It's
Anyway. Okay, so G.I. Jolie, do you recommend this issue?
Oh, absolutely. You have to figure out how Mary Jane escapes the clutches of Jonathan with an O, and it turns out she does it on her own. It's a
Yeah, it's
conclusion
nice.
that needs to be concluded.
Right. Brad, do you recommend this one?
100%.
Awesome. Josh?
Yeah, for sure.
Woo, Bex Luthor.
Yeah, the damsel saved herself. Like, that's pretty much the best you could ask for in this situation, right?
It's definitely a fun issue, and it's a better resolution than I thought that we would see, so that's good. And with that, now we're going to jump to Spectacular Spider-Man 145, the conclusion of the Boomerang two-parter. And the title of this one is And It Gets Worse. But actually, the title of this one is The Boomerang Return. I'm not sure why they left the S off, but whatever. So, this is part two of a story. So, I'm not going to summarize the last issue, but basically, somebody set up someone to get murdered to make it look like that other person was the victim, but no, they were trying to make it look like they were the victim, but actually the other person was. And Peter Parker is just realizing now in the middle of the night exactly what's happened. He realizes it was all a setup. So two guys are in a race with these boats, and one of the guys had the other one murdered so that he could win, right? So that's what he realizes here. And so Peter Parker puts on his costume and swings into action. And he's going to the yacht club to try and investigate this crime further. And sure enough, he runs across Boomerang, who is that? Boomerang is the one that did the murdering, right? I don't remember.
Yes.
Yes. He was paid to do it.
Right.
By a guy who then was paid by the boat guy.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
There was
right. And so now Boomerang has actually said, "Oh, I'm gonna kill Spidey for free. You didn't have to pay me." So right away, Spider-Man runs into Boomerang, who hits him with he actually gives it a name, a gaserang. Ooh. He hits him with a gaserang and knocks Spider-Man out. And Spider-Man is unconscious, face down in the water, which means he's dead. So this should be the end of the story, but it's not. They keep going. We cut over to Central Park and to our first little interlude. It actually says Interlude 1. And we see these cops coming across a dead body, and on the wall we see painted in blood, Kingpin, the wolves bite back. And this is the ongoing subplot about the Lobos brothers, right? Who are
definitely not werewolves. for sure.
definitely not werewolves, but they are
Not.
competing gang members in New York. Then we cut over to Interlude 2, and another famous first appearance. We are introduced to Mary Jane's cousin, Christy Watson, who is the Oliver of the Spider-Man comics. If you don't know who Oliver was, he was the cousin on Brady Bunch. Whenever a sitcom is running out of ideas, they introduce a cousin or a new baby, and unfortunately, with this, we get Christy Watson. But anyway, we'll see where this goes. Then we cut over to Interlude 3, and we see a kind of, again, we're kind of reading these out of order, unfortunately. Now Joe Robertson's out of the hospital, and he's walking along with his lawyer, and he's basically telling her, actually, no, like, I'm not even going to fight this. I'm going to plead guilty because it's my fault that Tombstone was allowed to, go free for so long, so I'm going to take responsibility for it. And J. Jonah Jameson is so shocked that he actually spits his cigar out. And then we cut back to the Spider-Man story. And Spider-Man is tied up in a chain on this boat, and Boomerang is, zipping along. And his secret plan, instead of just drowning Spider-Man or killing him with a gas ring, he leaves him tied up in the boat and just takes off and points the boat towards a bunch of other boats that are in this race. And he's just kind of crossing his fingers, hoping that this will kill Spider-Man, right? He does everything the hard way, I guess.
Point it at a buoy that's going to explode?
Yes, you're right. So Spider-Man comes to, and he uses his spider strength to break the chains, right? But then, of course, I just read this. I don't remember. Oh, so this is the bad guy. This is technically the guy. The redheaded guy is the one that hired Boomerang, and he is now, full on cheating. He's opening up like a hatch, a little doorway on his boat, and using this like fake, smoke to disguise where he is. And Spider-Man manages at the last minute to use his foot to steer the boat out of the way of the buoy, and then and then breaks free the chains. And then Boomerang sees what's happening, so he starts throwing other boomerangs at him. And then the redheaded guy is he's using all of his tricks. He's got he's got turbo jets in the back of his sailboat, and somehow I guess people can't hear them. I don't know. Boomerang is still throwing boomerangs. It gets confusing at Spider-Man, and then since Spider-Man is not in the boat anymore, Boomerang just assumes he's killed him. So he's like, "Oh, that last ring must have clipped him. I did it. I killed Spider-Man." And then we cut back over to the redheaded guy, and he's still doing his thing. Oh yeah, and like the fog is lifting now, the fake fog. And then Boomerang's like, wait a minute, something's wrong. Spider-Man's body should have floated up by now, but sure enough, Spidey is sticking to the bottom of the boat, right? Because he's got spider powers. And then Boomerang's flying along to try and figure out what's going on. And then Spider-Man comes up the side of the boat and shoots his web at Boomerang and holds on to him. And now Boomerang's like freaking out. And he ends up flying up into the air, pulling Spider-Man with him. And then Spider-Man's boat crashes into the redheaded guy's boat and explodes in this massive explosion. Then Spider-Man and Boomerang fall into the water. And then basically the redheaded guy is foiled, Boomerang's foiled, and Spidey wins the day. And that is the end. And I can just say, this issue was not quite as good as last issue. I actually really like the setup of this story. This issue is a little bit more cliche. However, I think that Sal Buscema outdid himself in this issue. I think the art was really, really good. The story, not great, but it was still fun. The dialogue's good. The situations were cliche, but overall I enjoyed it. Brad, what did you think?
I know I shouldn't like Boomerang's costume, but I kind of do. Like, I know I'm not supposed to, but it kind of reminds me of like Mega Man, the Boomerang villain. I kind of like dig it, and I'm like, I shouldn't like Boomerang's costume, but that's just something that stood out to me.
It's nice color coordination.
Should.
He has way worse ones, so
for sure. Yeah, it made me definitely appreciate like how hard it has to be to write Spider-Man. Like for so long, I'm like, how does a writer take this character who's like fought the Sinister Six, and you gotta convince the reader like Boomerang might be the end all be all in history. Like I'm like, that's just gotta be a really tough sell.
That's a good point. To come up with new stories every week or every month, it's not easy. Bex Luthor, you sent us a link. Who is this here?
That's Boomerang.
That's his original costume?
No, that's his third costume. He's in his original costume. That's why I was like, you could like this costume all you want. Because this isn't bad.
Wow.
I love that he's got like a giant like uppercase B. The B stands for boomerang. It's like, yeah, we know Boomerang.
The B might stand for bitch. I know. And he's got like those candy dots, like
all
over him,
big jubes all over. Like we get it. You're wearing boomerangs. You don't need to like spell it out for us, dude.
His helmet has a little boomerang on it.
Oh man, that's great.
So yeah. Yeah, no, but this costume's fine. This one's good.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Brad, what'd you think of the script in this one?
Same thing where I'm like, come on, you're not gonna get me to buy into Spider-Man being in any real danger, and that's really the only plot of this. So that kind of makes it tough. I mean, literally, this whole issue is based on how is Spider-Man gonna survive this situation. When you make that the only real like threat, not like, what about this innocent person who's with Spider-Man? They could, die.
Good point.
Like there was no like ever point of like, okay, Spider-Man's going to get off this boat. These chains aren't going to be the end of Spider-Man. So, I mean, there wasn't really like a lot of stakes other than, will Spider-Man survive this? Which we obviously know he would. But I did think the positive of it, it was kind of like what we talked about earlier with the desert. Of, okay, what does Spider-Man do when he's on a boat in the middle of the ocean?
Right.
He's not going to be able to swing off buildings and anything like that. So how do you make that entertaining? So I thought that was like a cool challenge for the writer to put themselves in that position.
Right. G.I. Jolie, what do you think of the story in this one?
It was so stupid. But, like, I guess the good kind of stupid. Just like his Boomerang's costume is the good kind of stupid, and the whole entire thing took place at like a boat race, which is like it felt very much like the football episode to me, or like they may as well be playing water polo or literally any kind of sports, but it seems like the artist has a big old boner for, like, you know, aquatics, because this is really well done. Like, the art is phenomenal.
I agree.
And as somebody, like, I think it was mentioned before about the other, the Todd Mcfarlane, where it's like, how do you make it less tiring to draw the noodles? Well, how do you make it less tiring when you're like on the water? Like, this is boring shit. But this is not boring. It looks really, really cool. And like, there are way too many boomerangs though on Boomerang's costume. Like, his hip boomerangs are extra. Like, they actually literally make an X. And I don't know. There's just, as much as I didn't hate this book, but as much as I think about how the things I dislike, I can find like 3 other things that I liked about it more. Yeah, it's if somebody asked me how ridiculous a comic book could get, I'd be like, oh, here, do you want to know about the boomerang?
Yeah.
Take this.
That is a perfect summary. Like, you described this issue how I would describe like the Adam West Batman to someone. Like, it is ridiculous, but it's still like there are areas in which the color, like, it works. Like, I don't know, it shouldn't be good, but somehow it's okay. Yeah, like Brad was saying about how, like, you cannot convince me that Boomerang is going to kill Spider-Man. Just like, but somehow you will convince me that he's going to struggle his foot out of these chains and use his feet to steer the boat, but he's steering the boat into this convenient fog that the redhead is Baxter, by the way, that Baxter has created to give him a leg up in this boat race. Everything is ridiculous. One after the other after the other. Mm-hmm.
I think that the thing I like about the story is that the boat race itself grounds the story, and it gives it a little bit more of a realistic slant to it, you know? Like, having the motivation. I'm so sick of those. The worst kind of comic is where Dr. Octopus wreaks havoc to get the attention of Spider-Man so he can fight him. Like, that's garbage. At least here, there's a logical motivation. The guy wants to win a race, so he hires Boomerang to kill the other guy, and then Boomerang, because he knows Spider-Man is there, he offers to kill Spider-Man. At least it's logical motivation, even if what happens is ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
So I think it gives it that little bit extra dimension. Bex Luthor, what do you think?
I think a couple things.
Only
this
a couple.
One was, only a few. This one I think was the worst of the 3 and my favorite.
Of course.
First off, we got the cover. We got the most Spidey bondage I've seen in a while. 10 out of 10 on the rope play. Not sure what Spidey's safe word is, but hopefully Boomerang knows what it is. I disagree with Jolie also. Boomerang's costume is amazing. More Boomerangs, actually, would be beneficial. But back onto the story. My main gripe is Peter wakes up from a cold sweat. It's like, I figured out the twist. It's like, okay. Like, Like he just is like he tricked everybody. All right,
He
bud,
read last issue as well.
Yeah, like I know that because we were in the office room with the bad guys as the readers, but how do you know that? Like he just assumes that this guy is tricking everybody? I mean, like, yeah, you're right, but also you have nothing to go on.
It'd be
So I
nice
guess,
to
like,
see how he came to that conclusion, right?
I guess he's trying to, like, go to the boat to find evidence. Like, he's not just going right to the police and being like, hey, this guy killed this other guy.
Right.
And then Boomerang also tells him the whole thing, so he's, like, for sure about it, right? When he chains him up, Boomerang tells him the whole story about how he got hired, like, what he did in high school, what's going, like, what he's having for lunch. He tells him the
Right.
whole shebang. So I like that. The other thing I really, really like is I love Robbie Robertson's lawyer.
Yeah.
She's a queen, and I hope she's in more things, and I doubt she will be, but I love this woman.
Who, the Witch of the Waste?
Don't! She is a magic fairy godmother. Full pink. I'm a big fan of that. Now, it's just a funny issue. I think, like, the whole point that it's Boomerang and you're not at any point, like, concerned for Spider-Man is funny. Because, like, it's not really about if Spider-Man's gonna like, die or not. I just want to see if this rich weenie gets his comeuppance, and he does. And that's, like... That's a 10 out of 10 for me. I love when a rich weenie gets shit on. It's great. Also, he's not even that good of a sailor. He sucks.
Yeah.
He cheats.
Right.
Yeah, I'm with Becca. It's really annoying that he just wakes up and figures it out. Especially, I say this every week, and I will continue saying it every single week. They need to stop with these stupid flippin' interludes. I hate them. I hate
not going
the
anywhere.
interludes. I hate them so much. Stop. Like, just tell the story. What are you doing? No, we have to stop. We have to hint about 3 different subplots that are going to happen months from now. It's like, just like, focus on making this, like, this Spider-Man story a good one. You don't need to, like, stop the story in its tracks to, like, hint at other things later on. Just do this. If they cut those, like, 3 pages of interludes out, they could have had, like, a moment where Peter goes to this guy and kind of, like, starts talking to him to get more information, and that's how he figures out that the bad guy hired Boomerang.
Right.
And then that also could be how Boomerang, like, confronts him. Like, he's the guy gets suspicious. Like, Peter's like, it came around. I think he knows too much, and then, like, he sends Boomerang out to find Peter, and then Spider-Man is already there, and he's about to, like, swing away or something, and the two of them find each other, and that's where, like, something, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, stopping the action to tell a completely different story that doesn't tie into this is so frustrating. It really takes me out of the story. Not that I was, like, enthralled with this story, but it's just like, what does this have to do with anything? I hate it. But I had fun with everything else in this issue, honestly.
What about the art? Sorry,
the art is great. There's, like, there's moments too that are, like, super fun, that are kind of, like, out of the box. When Spidey finally breaks out of the chains, we have that, like, that spatang, like, word, but it's spelt with chains. Like, it's chain links that are, like, put together for the word. Yeah, it's great. There's, like, small moments like that are kind of, like, I didn't
notice that. Wow, very
like,
cool.
That's kind of, like, interesting, and, like, small little things to, like, plus up the visuals. Right. And I'm wondering if honestly Todd McFarlane is kind of, like, having a bit of an influence on other artists at the time, because that's not usually something we see, and Todd has kind of, like, been adding in extra things and, like, making a panel interesting to look at besides just the action that's happening. So I was super happy with the art. There's some really fun things going on. But I mean, honestly, Sal Buscema never really disappoints, so.
Right. Brad, are you familiar with Sal Buscema?
I am. I've seen a lot of it. I love his work too. Like he's often not like discussed when you talk about some of the iconic like Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane. But to me, like his work always like still holds up too. It's not even like one of those like for that time it was good. Like still makes no difference. You could get right into it, and I think you're reading a comic book from like almost over 30 years ago.
And the thing is he's not just like he's a great artist, but we got to talk about his storytelling. I just want to point out the sequence Josh mentioned where he breaks out of the chains. If you go to the pages leading up to that, when he breaks the first chain, it's a nice little contrast between him on the boat, then the buoy, then him on the boat, then the buoy, back and forth. Then on the next page, there's a great sequence where Baxter is looking back and he sees the boat way back behind him, and then we cut to like a different angle of him looking over his shoulder. Then we get a close-up of his hand. Then we get the smoke coming out, right? And on the next page, this is my favorite. Spider-Man is on the boat. It's a nice wide shot. Then we cut to a close-up of his foot. Then we cut to a shot of the boat coming down the water in the opposite direction, right? So it's a nice contrast. Then we cut to the front of the boat. And it just, what a creative way to do this little sequence, I just think he's so, like, and again, the inking style is so inky. It's not supposed to look realistic. It's supposed to look like ink. And it reminds me that I'm reading a comic book that's drawn by a human being, right? Not a computer or not whatever else it may be. So yeah, I really love this issue.
Of that specific page that you're talking about, the movement line that follows the entire composition of the frames, which is just gorgeous. And something that is very rare in modern comics. So that when you see it, excuse me, but so that when you see it, it's just like you miss it and you forget how good comic book storytelling really could be.
I agree.
Really can be, I should say.
So overall, I love this issue, and I definitely recommend it. Not as good as part 1, but Brad, do you recommend this one?
I don't. I have a question. Like, I'm curious about something. I want because everyone's comment, and I definitely believe me, rolled my eyes at the Spider-Man Eureka moment at the beginning of like, I figured it out with, nothing to base this on. Would you guys rather that or those moments, and you have to pick one of these two, it can't be a well-done one, or those bad moments in any movie or comic book when a character makes a realization off of some kind of stretch conversation that they had with someone else, where someone else would be like, I had a bread box growing up. The killer had a bread box.
Yeah.
Right? And then that's what I'm like, would I rather there be some really bad connection or just own it and be like, I'm driving along and I suddenly connected 2 dots. I didn't need this person to say this thing. So that's what's going on in my head. I'm trying to figure out which of those two is like, just save me the time and give me the quick, ridiculous one.
That's a good point. Because I appreciate the effort that writers do when you have those moments, but they're always some really flimsy connection, right? Always, yeah. So that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. I don't know which one I'd pick.
I'd prefer the flimsy connection, I think. The whole, like, somehow Palpatine returned thing is just too much for me. I can't do it.
Somehow,
you know what I mean? That was the same feeling I got with this. He's like, oh, you know what? I actually know what's happening. Like, how? What are you talking about?
On it.
Yeah.
Figured it out.
I'm assuming you guys watched that video then about the new Star Wars, like Rise of Skywalker, where they talk about that somehow thing.
No,
I haven't seen that.
There's a new video. It's got like ridiculous amount of views. Someone just posted like an hour and a half breakdown of why they didn't like the last Rise of Skywalker. And usually, like, I stay away from like the overly negative things. But I'm like, okay, everyone's talking about this. Let me watch it. And they break that down of how this main villain, who you haven't referenced, I don't remember that being that bad until they reference that. Of like, like it comes up, the dead have risen. They're like, oh, you're just going to throw that into the crawl? And then like Oscar Isaac just saying like, somehow he's returned. I'm like, I don't remember like that bothering me in the theater, but I'm like, now that's really bothering me.
And the whole like story of how Palpatine is back, they didn't tell in the movie, but they had in a Fortnite event. So if you if you played Fortnite, you would have understand how Palpatine came back.
That's probably why I wasn't mad.
See, the thing is at the end of the day, it doesn't actually matter how he's back. It's still a crap idea because it destroys the
The previous two.
Yeah, but it also destroys Return of the Jedi. The whole point is that Vader has an arc. He kills the main villain, but it doesn't matter because now the main villain's back.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It also ruins the prequels, too, because he was supposed to be the chosen one who would defeat the dark side of the Force, and then he does that, but then he doesn't, so it doesn't matter.
Right.
So everything about Anakin Skywalker is useless.
Yeah.
I think I could have forgiven it if they would have like set that up from the beginning. They could have come up with some BS like you can destroy the dark side, but it's always going to return in some way or something. You know what I mean? But it's the fact that they just went back on their word from the previous two stories, and they were like, forget the Last Jedi. That didn't happen. Palpatine's back. You'll like this, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really what bothers me about it.
Well, anyway, we could talk about Star Wars all day long, but so in other words, getting back to this, Brad, do you recommend this comic?
Because I like the Batman Adam West show, I will say yes based only on that.
Okay. Who has anyone else? Okay, who else? It's been so long since I asked. Who else needs to recommend? Jolie?
Yes, both myself and Bex.
I didn't know. I forgot myself this time.
I only recommend this book to anybody who needs writing cues for the inspiration for the amount. I didn't realize how. Okay, just let's cut to the chase. The word boomerang is so versatile. You could have literally any kind of rang. He's got a screamerang. He's got a gasserang. Like you could have a banana-rang, or like Batman's got batarangs. I didn't realize
a bangarang.
Yeah, I didn't realize just how great the word boomerang is. So for that, I will give this a mild recommendation.
Okay. Just for the boomerangs, okay.
Yeah.
You want a fun list of... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it's okay. I was going to go into mine, so go ahead. I want to hear about the list. I was just going to say,
do you want a fun list of rangs?
Yes, please.
You got more rangs?
Start listing off those rangs.
All right, we got some shatterangs, gasarangs, razorangs, screamerangs. What's a bladderang? Oh, it's a bladerang. Sorry, I just can't read.
A bladderang.
That makes more sense. This one pisses on you. Gravity rangs, reflexorangs, electrorang, and multirangs, which are thrown dual-handed.
Whoa. Love that.
Fun fact about Boomerang, despite being a criminal, he feels it's his civic duty to vote.
As all good...
Also, he calls his fans the Boomers. So.
Oh, good.
Oh, Jesus.
Man.
So relatable.
We need Boomerang in the new Spider-Verse movie now.
Yes.
Yeah, right there next to the Spot.
Boomerang runs an Instagram fan page centered around Gog. Gog being a giant green or orange alien creature.
This is crazier and crazier, eh?
Comics are so fun.
This is almost as crazy as like BTS's fandom, but anyway.
Don't bring that negativity into this
I love
podcast.
you, Josh. We stand. Don't come for us.
I love Jimin.
Okay, anyway.
Yeah, I don't recommend... I don't know. It's not that I don't recommend this one. It's just kind of like... whatever. You know what I mean? I wouldn't recommend it or not recommend it. I feel like it's just like... that interlude stuff really bothers me. And then everything else in the issue, I think, is just kind of fun. If you're reading it, you might have some fun with it, but I don't know. I wouldn't, like, go out of my way to recommend.
All right. Okay, I guess that's it. That wraps up this episode. Unfortunately, I wish we could talk all night, but Becca's got stuff to do. So anyway...
But I got shit to do.
Yeah. So anyway, Brad, we want to thank you so much for joining us. We hope you had a good time.
I had an absolute blast. Thank you guys for having me.
We'll definitely have you on again in the near future if you're up for it, for sure.
100%.
Right, and Josh, you're gonna tell us right where we can. Is Josh? You gonna tell us where we can find it?
Yeah, so make sure you guys check out Geek and You Shall Find. You can find it on Amazon. Where else? Where else did you say?
And
like you said, like kind of everywhere, right?
iTunes is a good one. some I haven't heard. I think Voodoo.
Okay.
I think I've heard Crackle. So I always saw Amazon and iTunes just to be safe.
Okay, perfect. So if you look up Geek and You Shall Find, you'll definitely find where you can watch it. It's featuring some interviews with Neil Adams, Stan Lee, George R.R. Martin, plenty of people. The documentary looks to demonstrate why being a geek is not only okay, but might just be the greatest thing that's ever happened to you. Is there anything else we should know about the documentary before we sign off, or?
Just anyone who's ever interested in kind of the history of modern geekdom and kind of its origins. And, you know, I wish it could have been 10 hours long. They included a lot of stuff we didn't get in, but that's why we're currently working on a series that allows us to kind of go further in depth about some topics.
Awesome. All right, so stay tuned for that. And we also want to thank you guys so much for listening to the podcast. It really helps when you leave us a review over on Apple Podcasts or on Facebook or Twitter at the Comic Book Syndicate. Please let us know what you guys think about the comics we're reading and the podcast itself. We want to keep that comics conversation going.
That's right. So until next Monday, see you later.